There is an obesity epidemic in this country today that is killing more people than ever before. The leading killer in the nation is heart disease, atherosclerosis, heart attack, strokes, diabetes, and it is all a part of an overall health crisis. Welcome to First Responder Fitness with Carl Wimmer, where armor is forged through mental, spiritual, and physical preparation. Welcome to First Responder Fitness with Carl Wimmer. I am honored that you are here watching and listening. And if you are continuing to seek your goals of health and prosperity and a bright, long future, I'm proud of you. And I just want you to know that. Well, election season has come and gone. And we have the results obviously have come in, and about a week has passed, and I know that there's still a lot of really, really raw feelings. Anytime you have a presidential election, pretty much half the country is going to be unhappy, half the country is going to be happy. And I would just encourage you, the bottom line is this: no person in public office is going to have such a tremendous effect on your personal life that you should allow it to affect your mental health, your physical health, or your spiritual health. Yes, I had my favorites in this particular race. Absolutely. I pay very close attention to politics. And that's all I'll say for now as far as my involvement in politics. But I am involved and have been involved for a long, long time. And so I do pay attention. But at the end of the day, win or lose, no person in public office should be able to control your personal health, your mental health, your physical health. With that being said, I want to just come right out and say that if physical health, if nutrition, and if being someone who cares about your overall physical well-being is important to you, then I am absolutely ecstatic about one particular thing that has come out of this election. And that is what appears to be the obvious appointment of Robert Kennedy Jr. to some position at a national level in the health industry. Now, whether they make him Secretary of Health and Human Services or put him over the Federal Drug Administration, I don't know. But if you care about your health, if you care about clean food, if you care about nutrition, if you care about the things that are so important to us here at First Responder Fitness, this news should excite you. And I'm going to give you some reasons why. We've talked about so many of the reasons in the past, but I really want to bring this home to you because it is so rare that a political appointee or a political person in political office can have such a tremendous effect on the overall health of a nation. And we have been spiraling as a country when it comes to our health, our nutrition, and so many other things that involve our physical well-being. We've been spiraling for 50 years. And there has been no end in sight. But now it appears that someone who takes their health very seriously, someone who used to be a former drug addict, someone who admits to having drug addictions, heroin addictions, and someone who has fought through some of the darkest, most hellacious times that a person could possibly go through and come out of it healthier than he's ever been, even though he is old in comparison to when he was, in college. When Robert Kennedy was in college and he was addicted to drugs and he was probably selling drugs and those types of things, the argument can be made that he is far more healthy now, without question, than he was back then. And the man has gray hair and he's older. But he has prioritized health. And to me, that is exciting. Now, I know that some of you are saying, well, he's crazy. He's a conspiracy theorist. He's this, he's that. We're going to break it down for you a little bit today. But the first thing I want to point out is this. The current secretary of the U.S. Department of Health is Secretary Levine. Take a look at Secretary Levine. Here's a photo. Here's a picture of Secretary Levine. I'm not going to comment on anything except for the fact that this is a person who is, from observational standpoint, obese. This is a person who, just from observation, does not prioritize their health. This is a person who is in charge of a large swath of our nation when it comes to health and human services, and they do not appear to practice what they should be preaching. By contrast, take a look at Robert Kennedy Jr. Here's a man who is 70 years old. 70. How many of us looked that good when we were 30? And I didn't. I mean, certainly I was stronger than he's ever been at 30 years old, but I was fat. I was a fat powerlifter. This man prioritizes his health and his fitness. And just immediately by looking at him, he instills confidence in me when it comes to prioritizing health and fitness. Now, I've heard everyone say, oh, he's going to ban vaccines. He's going to pull vaccines. He's going to ban vaccines. On the night of the election, I was watching, I believe it was CNN, and they asked him point blank, will you ban vaccines? And he said no. And he said in the past, all of my kids are vaccinated. Vaccines are one of the greatest things that the country has ever found. But he wants more caution, more oversight, more research, more study. Who could possibly be against that? But I'm not going to talk about vaccines. Why? Because it's far outside my area of expertise, and I strive very, very hard here at First Responder Fitness not to be an ultra-crepidarian. If you don't know what that word means, it's simply, you see them all the time on social media. Ultra-crepidarians are people who talk about things for which they really don't have any training or knowledge. They talk about issues that they're not qualified to talk about. You see that all the time, especially in the health industry, especially in the fitness industry. You see people passing on information that they heard from somebody else that they think knows what they're talking about, and they talk as if they have some kind of an authority. That's an ultra-crepidarian. We need to strive in our lives not to be that way. Not only is it obnoxious, but it spreads false ideas. It spreads nonsense, and it spreads complete garbage information to a mass of people who then turn around and become ultra-crepidarians themselves. So I am not even going to touch the vaccine situation because I don't know enough about it to speak with any kind of authority. And I'm willing to bet that you don't either. So we're not even going to talk about that particular issue. We are going to talk about the areas where I am super excited about the potential changes that could come to the Department of Health and the Federal Drug Administration if Robert Kennedy Jr. gets appointed and has some authority over those departments. First and foremost is the supplement industry. This is an arm that the FDA oversees or has oversight and loosely regulates. Here's the problem. Robert Kennedy has pointed out the incestuous relationship between the Federal Drug Administration and big pharmaceutical companies. That's a fact. Oftentimes, people will go from pharmaceutical companies to the FDA to pharmaceutical companies. Now, is there anything inherently nefarious about that? I could make the argument that no, there's not, because these are experts in the field who are moving back and forth from different areas of private sector versus governmental sector. And so the argument could be made that it's a legitimate exchange of value and knowledge. The problem that comes along with that is you get a closed circle. You get way too much influence from the pharmaceutical companies over the Federal Drug Administration. I'm not at all a conspiracy theorist. I'm not someone who will go down that rabbit hole. I just look at things from a common sense standpoint. And one of the things that blew the lid off for me was in 2020. In 2020, the FDA got a bee in their bonnet and decided they were going to start regulating and, in fact, prohibit the over-the-counter sales of N-acetylcysteine. What is N-acetylcysteine, you say? Well, it's NAC. You probably heard NAC. It's a more common term for this particular supplement. NAC is one of the most powerful antioxidants on the market today. In fact, it cleanses your body's organs. There are so few things out there that support or clean your body's organs or help support your body's organs. People say, oh, do a liver cleanse. And so many times the liver cleanses itself. So many times the kidneys, the liver, and all these organs, they are self-cleansing. However, as law enforcement officers and as firefighters, you have no doubt gone to overdoses where a teenager or someone else, they don't really want to die. But it's a cry for attention. It's a cry for help. And boy, they need it. I have so much sympathy for that. But they'll overdose on something like acetaminophen, Tylenol. It's not going to kill them. But you take too much of that, and it's going to destroy some of your internal organs. So as you take this person to the hospital, as they get rushed to the hospital, in addition to pumping their stomach if it's not too late or giving them activated charcoal, one of the first things the emergency room will give them is NAC. They will give them a sizable dose of N-acetylcysteine because it does, in fact, help support organs. If you go on and I don't recommend you do this, but if you go on a binge drinking, happy holiday weekend, or maybe the entire Christmas season, I've seen kind of humorous memes that says, Thanksgiving is over, Christmas is upon us, hang on there, my liver, I encourage you to hang in there, little buddy, hang in there, and anyway, it just kind of funny if people say, it's the drinking season and all the way until New Year's. If you go on a bender, you go on a weekend bender or something like that, it would obviously benefit you to take some N-acetylcysteine, NAC, afterward. In many cases, if people are on performance-enhancing drugs, particularly oral performance-enhancing drugs, the liver toxicity is a huge concern. And so many of those bodybuilders, many people who are on performance-enhancing drugs take NAC to combat the damage that can be caused to the liver and some of the other organs in the body. Well, the FDA decided that for whatever reason, and I know the reason, they said that at some point NAC was studied first as a drug before it was released as a supplement. And because of that, they have control over it. Okay. And they sent out a letter between 2020 and 2021 around the time of COVID, is COVID's height. And I got to tell you, I was taking NAC almost every day during COVID for the antioxidant benefits to try to prevent from catching COVID. But either way, during that particular time, they sent out a letter to major marketers and said, we are going to control this. We are going to take it off the shelf. You cannot sell this. Amazon pulled it off their shelves. I think Walmart pulled it off. No, well, Walmart was going to, but they actually kept it. As far as I could see, you could still order it from Walmart. Many retailers pulled NAC off their shelves. Even though they were not ordered to, they did, just based off of this threat from the FDA. I actually asked my pharmacist, I said, what is going on with NAC? And he shook his head. And here's a pharmacist, a guy that's in the midst of the pharmaceutical industry. And he says, I try not to think that it's nefarious. I try not to think that it's about money, but I don't know what else to tell you. He said, the pharmaceutical companies are missing out on millions and millions, if not billions of dollars by not being able to control N-acetylcysteine. And so they get the attack dog, the FDA, to try to control it. Well, there was so much pushback, not only from citizens and people, but from pharmacists and from the health industry. And in fact, congressmen and women, Congress pushed back. And that threat has largely gone away, and you can now find NAC back on the shelves in Amazon. You can order from Amazon, and I do order it from Amazon. But NAC is not the only drug. It's not the only drug, the only, I should say, supplement that they have attempted to control, because they're, and again, I don't think the FDA is a puppet for Big Pharma, but I certainly think that the influence is too much. Let's just say that. There is a lot of influence there, cross-influence. They did remove, several years ago, Ma Huang, also better known as ephedrine, from being able to be sold. Now, I have to admit, as a former SWAT officer, as a retired SWAT cop, when they started controlling ephedrine and made it to where you couldn't get ephedrine over the counter, but you could get it at the pharmacy, you just had to sign for it in most states. Meth labs really took a dive. I mean, it really, really helped on the meth pandemic, a meth epidemic. And so I understand that one to a point. I really do. But it seems like those supplements that are effective, that are actually useful, are the ones that are scrutinized the most by the FDA, and the FDA really tries to take control over them. And that is unfortunate. It would probably surprise many of you that Viagra, the primary ingredients in the brand name Viagra, was at one time sold over the counter. But it had to be controlled. I don't know why things like that have to be controlled by the FDA. I don't know why every single drug, every single helpful supplement needs to be controlled by the FDA. We are adults, and we should make educated decisions for our own health rather than having the nanny state do it for us when it comes to health and nutrition. And it's a constant battle. It is a constant battle. So Robert Kennedy really, really does not like what appears to be the incestuous relationship between the FDA and the pharmacy industry. He says this, quote, the FDA has become a marketing arm for the pharmaceutical industry. It's not the guardian of public health, but an agency captured by the industries it regulates. So he wants more transparency and more sunlight shined on the relationship between pharmaceutical industry and the FDA. And who could possibly think that's a bad idea? Who could possibly be against that? I think that's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. He also wants more transparency when it comes to drug approvals. When it comes to the FDA, he says the FDA, unfortunately, is not acting as an independent regulator. It's acting as a cheerleader for industry, and it's doing everything it can to make it easier for pharmaceutical companies to put their products on the market. I don't know if that's true or not, but the fact is he simply wants more transparency on pharmaceuticals and FDA regulations, more transparency on drug approvals, and that is a good thing. Anyone who doesn't think that that is a good thing, I just want to point out one thing, especially to you law enforcement officers, especially you firefighters. Opioid epidemic. Who created the opioid epidemic? Heroin has been illegal and has been around forever. And it did not create an opioid epidemic. Our nation was flooded with expensive opioids approved by the FDA, marketed by pharmaceutical companies, and people got tragically addicted. I have a dear friend, law enforcement officer, whose wife had a surgery and was given a very popular opioid. And she went home. She was in a lot of pain. She was taking this opioid, and she took it as prescribed. And that particular drug wrapped its tentacles around this dear woman and gripped her tight to the point where she came out of this and she ended up forging scripts so that she could get her drug. She is one of thousands of examples of people who were kept and made. They were made addicts, and they were kept addicts by the pharmaceutical companies. It was not created by the heroin that is coming over the border. And so, absolutely, the FDA needs more oversight and transparency in what drugs it provides to the general public, and oversight in watching what the pharmaceutical companies are doing. Mr. Kennedy, supports strongly independent research where science, he says, where science is not hijacked by industry interests. We need independent research, he says. We need transparency in the process, and we need accountability. All of these are quotes directly from him. Doesn't sound like a lunatic to me. Sounds like someone who cares about our health. But let's talk about something even more important. Something that is killing people at record numbers. Something that I have preached on this podcast for a long time now. And that is the obesity epidemic in this country. If you go back 50 years, do the research. Don't take my word for it. Do the research. 50 years ago, there was not an obesity epidemic. There is an obesity epidemic in this country today that is killing more people than ever before. The leading killer in the nation is heart disease, atherosclerosis, heart attack, strokes, diabetes, and it is all a part of an overall health crisis. Go all the way back to the 1970s, and you see where the food in our country started to morph. You'll see a couple major things that started to take place. One was a consolidation of the major food companies. You had companies like General Mills, Nestle, Kraft, these corporate consolidations of food. They bought out smaller food companies, smaller market companies, began purchasing smaller brands and expanding there. So by the 1990s, the top 10 food companies controlled a vast majority and portion of the food market. What this did is it kind of standardized the products on the grocery shelf. This made it so that food choices were controlled by a small number of corporations. And from that point on, we also saw a rise in processed and convenience foods. I am not a food fearmonger. In fact, I despise fearmongers in the nutrition industry. The Paul Saladinos of the world who want to scare you about whatever the heck the latest trend is this week. I mean, that gentleman has changed his position on his particular diet at least 3 times in the last 15, 20 years. He was all in on, I think he was vegan at one time, and then he was all in on carnivore, and now he's fruit and meats. I mean, whatever gets him clicks, whatever gets him sales, and whatever gets you watching his stuff, he pushes. It drives me nuts. I cannot stand food fearmongers, and I'm not one. But there are some fundamental truths that we need to be aware of. What are some of those? I already mentioned one, the food consolidation that took place in the early 1970s and 80s. So we have less actual real options at the market, at the store than you think. I remember, let me tell you a story real quick. I worked for before I was a police officer, I worked as a loss prevention person, catching shoplifters at a major national retailer. And as part of the training when I was hired, they sent me out of state to go to their headquarters. It was amazing, fascinating. I had 3 or 4 days, I think is all it was, of training, legal training and those types of things on loss prevention. But we also saw the manufacturing. And I'm not lying when I tell you this. It was hilarious. They took us back to a processing place, kind of their bakery area. And they had a conveyor belt where these little sponge cakes came down 2 different conveyor belts. One went to the left, one went to the right. The one on the left was either a Zinger or a Twinkie. It was a brand name sponge cake with cream filling. The one on the right was the store brand. Exactly identical. Exactly identical. They came out of the same machine, but the one went one way, one went the other direction. And they put different wrappers on them. And they marked up the brand name. It was unbelievable. Eye-opening to me. We have less options when you go to the stores. But the second major thing is the rise of processed and convenience foods. The late 20th century saw an explosion of processed and convenience foods. We saw the microwave revolution. I still remember my first microwave. Most of you are too young to remember that probably, but it had a turn dial. You turned it past 3 and then you turned it to the, where you wanted it, and it took you 15 minutes to warm up a burrito when nowadays it takes 30 seconds. The microwave revolution, and the growth of fast food chains, so McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Burger King, Taco Bell, all of those, they exploded. And you add that to the fact that through the 60s, 70s, early 80s, many families were single income families. But as inflation grew, as poverty grew, people needed to go to work. So you had 2 income families. Mothers and fathers both working outside the home to save time. Hey, babe, what we having for dinner tonight? I don't know. I'll just stop by Burger King. Okay, good idea. I'll just stop by and grab a pizza. Convenience and time saving really became a cultural phenomena in America. Fast food. Add that to the fact that every couple years, they would supersize the supersizes. The portions got so massive. I remember when, if you ever went to 7-Eleven, you go to 7-Eleven, and the biggest drink you could get at 7-Eleven was the 32-ounce Big Gulp. It was that way all my childhood, 32-ounce Big Gulp. Then, when I was about 6th, maybe 7th grade, they came out with the super Big Gulp, 44 ounces of cool, refreshing, sugar-filled soda. And boy, super Big Gulp, though. Yes, that's a large. And they made advertisements about this. Big burly lumberjack guy goes into a store and he's into a fast food place and says, "I'd like a large drink." And they hand him a little itty bitty, 12-ounce drink. So you call that a large? And then it shows him at the 7-Eleven with the 44-ounce super big old, be like, "That's a large," and he's filling up. Not long after that, by about 9th grade, high school, the double gulp came out. 64 ounces of diabetes in a cup. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You could supersize your meal for a quarter. And the entire time, we're supersizing our belt line. We got addicted to driving everywhere, and we got addicted to the convenience of fast food, highly processed foods. Americans' eating habits, along with the eating habits of their children, we raise an entire generation of obese people. And it has gotten worse every single decade since the 1970s. And there's been no change. There's been no change to our food, no change to our habits, no change to our physical fitness habits. And it is time that some changes take place on a macro nationwide level. No, I don't want the government reaching out its long arm and saying, "You can't have a big soda." Have as much soda as you want. But it would surely be nice if something would happen that would encourage healthy options. You ever notice you go to the store and if you want health food, it's double the cost of junk food? Sometimes triple or quadruple the cost. It's ridiculous, and things need to change. And I am hopeful that whatever position Robert Kennedy Jr. gets in, that some of these changes will be made. We need a revival in this country when it comes to clean food. When it comes to, I preach to you, eat single ingredient whole foods. That takes time. That takes effort. But it's so worth it. I'm not going to rail against GMO or non-GMO foods. I am generally a believer in organic foods, getting them as close to homegrown as you can. I love the farmers markets, homegrown vegetables, beef that is locally grown, locally harvested, those types of things. There's nothing better. The closer it is to home, the better. I think that GMO, genetically modified foods, play an important role in our country. In our world. It helps us to feed people who would otherwise starve to death. So I understand the realities there. I mean, all you have to do is go visit Zimbabwe sometime. My family, for many, many, many years, sends money to support feeding hungry children in different countries. And so I recognize the blessing that comes from some of these advancements in food. And so I don't think it should be shut down. I don't. But there needs to be just as strong as we are pursuing science-based and technology-based and foods that are GMO and all that garbage, there needs to be as much attention paid to helpful single ingredients, local, affordable, healthy foods. The bottom line is, over the past 50 years, the American food industry has undergone a transformation driven by technology, technological innovation, change in consumer habits, a growing awareness in health and environmental issues. There's been a lot of changes. But the one thing that has not changed is consumers continue to demand more transparency. We want transparency. We want healthy choices. We want sustainable practices. And the only way the food industry will likely continue to evolve and respond to those things is under pressure from those who demand it. And having a voice at the highest level of government will be nothing but great for us. You got to look at the obesity trends in this country. In 1970, there was not an obesity epidemic. In fact, according to the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, that's a mouthful, the NHANES, the rate of obesity among adults was 15% in the early 1970s. Children and adolescents had an obesity rate of 5% in the early 1970s when I was born. 5% childhood obesity. 1980s, the first signs of the obesity crisis was becoming more apparent. Obesity rates began to climb. By the late 80s, adult obesity rates had increased to about 20%, and obesity in children and adolescents was becoming far, far more common. I'm an example of that. I was a chubby kid. I was born in the mid-70s, grew up in the 80s, and I was always kind of a chubby, strong kid. That's who I was. By the 1990s, the obesity rate skyrocketed. By the 90s marked a pivotal decade for the obesity crisis. According to the same organization, the NHANES, the obesity rate in adults jumped from about 23% in 1990 to 30% by the end of the decade. In children and adolescents, the rate rose as well. The adolescents' obesity rate climbed to 12 to 15% by the end of the 90s. Again, key factors: changes in food consumption patterns, more processed garbage food, calorie-dense food, and fast food became readily available. You have a 10,000 calorie, or well, that's a lot, right? You have a 5,000 calorie meal at your disposal. And in fact, Thanksgiving's coming really soon. And the amount of calories you're going to consume in one day is astronomical for many of you. And the fact is, we have so much high calorie, low nutrition foods at our fingertips. That's why I have started this particular podcast. We need to flip the script on that and have low calorie, nutrient dense foods. Low calorie, nutrient dense foods, not these high calorie, low nutrient garbage foods that are filling your pantry and making you fat and making you sick and making your children sick. Finally, in the 1980s, we saw a huge increase in the rise of sedentary lifestyle behaviors such as television viewing and video games. Not against either. Not against television viewing or video games, but my goodness, exercise has gone out the window. You know what video games were for me and my brother growing up? It was going outside and sword fighting with 1x2s in the backyard, right? Going in the back and climbing the giant tree and nailing nails into the tree. And I know it's not, probably shouldn't have been hammering on the tree, but building forts in the tree. It was a lot of fun. Putting swings in the trees. That's what we did. That was our video games. Mostly because we couldn't afford anything fancy. The increased portion sizes in restaurants and packaged foods also contributed. And now let's see, by the time you get to the 2010s, over 40% of adults had reached obesity levels. More than half of America is now obese. More than half of America is obese. And children ages 2 to 19, 20% of them are obese. Unbelievable. Something has to change. We are killing ourselves. And we are told everything's fine. Body positivity comes out of the woodworks. It flows down from the government into our social lives. And I firmly believe we should be kind and sweet and gentle to people. But we need to love people with the truth. And the truth is, being obese is bad for you. Being obese will kill you. It causes heart disease. It makes it so you don't move now, you can't move later. If you won't move now, you can't move later. I saw it with my mother. I talk about her a lot. God rest her soul. She, last 20 years of her life, would not move. Would not exercise. Would not move. Had all the high-calorie, low-nutrient foods at her fingertips. Wouldn't move. Would not exercise. Would not do anything for her health. Last 10 years of her life, she couldn't move. She had the opportunity, but the last 10 years of her life, she couldn't move. It was too late. This is deeply personal to me. The health and overall well-being of our country is deeply personal to me. We need to get out of this mindset that our food needs to be highly processed, poisonous garbage, that we live in a fast food culture. Where are we going today? What McDonald's, what Burger King, what this, what that. I'm not saying that you need to not ever eat there. Have a burger and fries once in a while, but it certainly shouldn't make up the majority of your diet. Sugary, sweetened beverages in every size you could possibly want. The gallon jug, I see people with their gallon jugs going in and filling them up with full sugar soda. Killing themselves. It's slow suicide. Portion sizes. We need portion control. We need to watch what we're eating. Don't eat until you're stuffed to the gills every single time. We need to get out. We need to move. We need to exercise. We need to prioritize those things. Do I think that Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to be the panacea and savior of the country? Absolutely not. But it does my heart good to see someone who cares put in a position where they can make a real difference. If he says things that are crazy, if he says things that you disagree with, fine. You're an adult. Don't have a breakdown. Just disagree with him and don't listen. But if he does things that moves the needle even a little bit when it comes to our health, our supplementation, our pharmaceuticals, our food, and the prioritization of exercise in this country, then that is a win. And whether you supported Kamala Harris or Donald Trump for presidency, it's irrelevant to me. That's your private, personal business, just as it is mine. But I am excited about the possibility of Mr. Kennedy getting in there and making some real change for our real benefit. Keep an open mind. And until next time, be good to yourself, be good to others, and as always, stay safe.